Get started here. All right, so welcome Congressman Swalwell. Just do a quick little introduction. In 2012, Eric Swalwell was elected to represent California's 15th congressional district, which includes a large part of the East Bay. Now in his fourth term, he's working hard to bring new energy, ideas, and a problem-solving spirit to Congress, with a focus on advancing policies that support equality, opportunity, and security. Congressman Swalwell serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and believes protecting Americans is Congress's most solemn duty. He chairs the Intelligence Modernization and Readiness Subcommittee, which oversees overall management of the intelligence community. He also serves on the House Judiciary Committee, where his experience as a prosecutor and as a son and brother of law enforcement officers informs his perspective on criminal justice reform, while he also addresses issues including voting rights, LGBTQ equality, comprehensive immigration reform, and protecting a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions. And with that, I will hand it over to the Congressman to take it away.
Well, thank you, Teresa. Thank you to the Contra Costa County Bar Association for inviting me to be one of the keynote speakers. I'm wishing you all good health as we gather here remotely. And, you know, this is a time unlike any time we've ever lived through. And it's challenging all of us. It's challenging me and my family. It's challenging my colleagues as we try and, you know, organize and govern the country. We had our first Zoom election of our caucus leadership vote 2 days ago, where the Speaker of the House was elected in her own caucus by Zoom. And this is kind of like my time to shine, though, because, you know, having got elected to Congress at 31, I was always the IT help desk for the first couple of years. That was mostly what my more senior colleagues wanted to come to me for, you know, set up an Instagram account, a Snapchat account, turn off their phones when they were ringing in a hearing. And so now this is like my time to thrive, that I can help my more senior colleagues navigate Zoom. But we're adjusting just like you're adjusting. You know, before I go into the topic I wanted to talk to you all about, I did just want to, you know, tell you that I'm trying to lead by example. And my family and I, for the first time, will be spending Thanksgiving, just my wife, myself, our 3-year-old, our 2-year-old, and our black lab. We've chosen not to go to Indiana, where we typically would go with my wife's family. I really wish I could go, because my wife grew up in Mike Pence's hometown. Her parents are close with the Pences, and I really wanted to do an end zone dance considering the election results, but that's not why we're not going. It's because of COVID-19, and we just think it's safer for us to be on our own, and we recognize we have family members where for some of them it could be the last Thanksgiving, but we know that if we were to expose them to us, we would increase the chances that it would be their last Thanksgiving. And that's just a sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in. And I hope we all can, as we know a vaccine is now in reach, you know, really see that as the light at the end of the tunnel, and, you know, continue to mask up and distance ourselves and just be kind to one another, because we're going to get through this. Our country's too great to fail this test. And I know we can get through it, in that once we have that vaccine, the delta between a vaccine and a vaccination, we want to close that and make sure that every American has access to a vaccination. And that's what we're starting to work on now in the Congress, is how to fund that so you can't miss a vaccination. That if you're at a gas station, if you're at CVS, if you're at church, no matter where you go, there's a vaccination for you. That's the goal, so that we can get out of this national nightmare. Days and weeks feel like years and decades now. And I often ask my wife on a Friday, how many years did you live this week? Because it feels like, you know, so much happens right now, just in our country and our culture. But I want to talk to you about something that has stuck with me, even though it was a year ago yesterday. And that was when we were in the mix, in the thick of the impeachment of Donald Trump. And I was on the House Judiciary Committee, and it was a year ago yesterday that Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman testified to the committee. And he was one of the individuals who had listened to the president on July 25, 2019, when the president called President Zelensky, Aaron Zelensky of Ukraine, and asked him to do us a favor, though, to essentially use Ukrainian resources to manufacture dirt on who the president perceived would be his opponent in November 2020, Joe Biden. And if he did that, the Ukrainians would receive up to $400 million in security assistance, which actually had already been passed by Congress and signed into law. And as Lieutenant Colonel Vindman sat in the grand Ways and Means Committee Room, one of the grandest, oldest, largest committee rooms in Congress, with over 100 cameras on him and hundreds of people sitting behind him and dozens of members of Congress looking down at him, he was asked if he was scared at all or if his father was worried. And when he was asked that by my colleague Sean Maloney from New York, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman said, "Congressman, this is America. This is the country I have served and defended, that all of my brothers have served. And here, right matters. Here, right matters." I can still hear him saying that. An immigrant who came to our country from Ukraine, somebody who came at a young age with his twin brother, who also at the time was working at the White House in the National Security Council office, somebody who believed that speaking up and doing the right thing, that may not have worked in Ukraine, that may not work in Russia, that may not work in China or Turkey or Philippines, but here in the United States, he could speak truth to power, go before Congress, sit before the lights and the cameras, and he wouldn't be punished. His family would not have to live in fear. And that ultimately, because he did the right thing, it would matter. And 1 year later, I would say the jury is still out. I think he's right that the country he came to is a country where right would matter when he came as a boy. But right now, as we're being tested by a president who is defying what 80% of Americans have agreed upon, what every foreign leader has agreed upon, what every court case in America has agreed upon, and what every CEO has agreed upon, that there is going to be a new president in January. This president defies that. We're being challenged as to this idea of whether right still matters. You know, I don't know if any of you watched The Crown. It's probably one of my favorite shows. It just premiered on Sunday, I believe. And my wife and I have been burning through it, and it tracks the early 80s with Princess Diana and, of course, Margaret Thatcher. And I told my wife last night, as my wife, who works in the business world and really did not have any political leanings one way or another until she met me, and she'll blame that on me. She said to me, you know, Margaret Thatcher was really a conservative leader of Britain, and she put in place a lot of austere measures in the early 80s. And one of the episodes really shines a light on that. And I told my wife, I said, you know, I don't agree politically with Margaret Thatcher, and I think you're seeing that these fiscal and social policies really hurt people. But God, give me that as a political opposition leader, because how refreshing would it be to be in a country where we could just disagree over the size of government, or just disagree over what tax rate individuals should have to pay, just disagree over how we should fund our public schools and what the role of charter schools should be. I welcome those types of debates. I grew up the son of two Republicans. My brothers are police officers. As I said, I married a girl from Indiana in an all-Republican family. I go on Fox News mostly just so my family knows that I'm alive. It's like a proof of life for them, because they're not going to watch me on any other channel. So just give us a leader where we can have policy disagreements. But what we have lived through as a country over the last 4 years has not been a philosophical disagreement. It's been a creep into corruption. It's been an abandonment of political philosophies, the rule of law. And what I submit to you is we're being tested these next 62 days. We have to have faith in the courts. We have to have faith in institutions and norms and the media calling the race and foreign leaders recognizing that there's a president-elect and a transfer of power. And I've gotten texts and I've been getting lit up on social media by people saying, why aren't you freaking out more? Why aren't you hauling the president and his team into Congress? Why aren't you doing more as he tests us right now and he threatens not to leave office? And it's because I still have faith in you as a citizen, as a person who believes that we can get through this. We're going to be tested. Yes, there's a lot of damage somebody can do on their way out. 62 days to go. Conflicts that could be started. Alliances that we could walk away from, as we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, leaving our allies there in the cold, not informing them what we're doing, just packing up and leaving. Other treaties that we can pull out of, oil rights that we can sell in Alaska. There's a lot of damage that can be done. But I sit here still believing what Lieutenant Colonel Vindman believed, that right still matters. And if we can just hold on, have faith in the courts, have faith in each other, and not make a small, insignificant person bigger and more significant, that we will get through this. But the question really becomes on January 20, once it is President Biden and Vice President Harris, what do we do next? Well, on the policy side, I hope there's nothing that unites us more as Republicans and Democrats than shutting down the virus and reopening Main Street and reopening our schools and reopening our churches. Having widespread testing and tracing finally, and having everyone vaccinated. That should unite us, and we should invest every dollar we have to spend what it takes to get us out of this pandemic. We also have to work with everyone else in the world, because we will only move as fast as the rest of the world. It's a global economy that we're 5%, and 95% of the economy and the marketplaces are outside of the United States. So if other countries have not yet shut down this virus, it will hit us and affect us here at home. So although we've pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords and the World Health Organization and a lot of the alliances we've had, we're going to have to dive back into them and work with others to make sure that the vaccine reaches every soul, every person in the world, twice. That's the challenge. It looks like the Pfizer and Moderna vaccinations will require 2 injections. So we've got to do it twice. But I still believe that Republicans and Democrats can unite around that concept, to not politicize the solutions, to understand that wearing masks protects me and it protects you. So we've got a relief project to get us well, to provide cash support to individuals who are hurting and are unemployed, to businesses by reloading the Paycheck Protection Plan, providing employee retention credits, aid to restaurants and live venue companies. And then we have to transfer and transition to recovery. And recovery is not the cash and capital you provide to those who need it the most. It's what can you build and who can you put to work when you build it? This pandemic has certainly exposed that there's a disconnect between America's students and their teachers through broadband. There's millions of students who don't have the connectivity to do distance learning. Millions of Americans who don't have the connectivity to work from home. And so connecting the disconnected not only helps our productivity, it also creates jobs. Same thing with surface and road transportation. I'm excited that it looks like we will go back to congressional directed spending, which the public knows as earmarks. It looks like that's a possibility in the new Congress. They should be more transparent. We should do everything we can to reduce waste, but no one knows their area better than a member of Congress, much better than the federal government or people who are working in Washington. My priority at home, if we're going to have infrastructure recovery, will be Valley Link to connect the Dublin Pleasanton BART station and go all the way out to Stockton. 50 miles, up to 120 miles per hour, 6 to 7 different stops, taking 30,000 cars off the road each day, spending more time with your family and less time in congestion and traffic. It's soul-sucking, the traffic right now in the Bay Area. Recovery also means greening the grid, seeing opportunities and seeing that this pandemic is really a canary in a coal mine when it comes to investing in science. And you talk to young kids in America today, and they look at this pandemic and they fear that if we can't get this right, if we've politicized the solutions and we won't wear masks and we've alienated scientists, what are we going to do when all the chickens come home to roost on climate? We have an opportunity not to pit jobs versus the solutions, but to see jobs as the solution, jobs in carbon capture, sequestration, and reuse. That those jobs could be a bridge between a fossil fuel economy to a truly green economy. Relief and recovery. But the real question for our democracy is, what do we do next with what the president has exposed? And what has he exposed? He's taken gifts from foreign leaders. A couple months ago, I was meeting with a foreign leader who was in Washington, and I just offhandedly asked him where he was staying, mostly because my wife works in hospitality and she's kind of taught me, to ask people where they stay and to learn about their experience and then share it with her because she's always trying to improve at her job. I should have known what the answer was, but this leader said, well, of course, the Trump Hotel. This president has made millions on foreign leaders staying just across the street from the White House at the Trump Hotel, in absolute defiance of a constitution that says you can't do that. Security clearances, although his children have been red flagged by our government as not being worthy of them, he's overruled them and he's put them in positions of power. Pardons, he's abused those, granting pardons to people who are witnesses against them in exchange for those people who have come forward, like Roger Stone, and have said that they will never testify against the president. The independence of the Department of Justice. He has an attorney general who is making cases go away, who is getting rid of prosecutors like the Southern District of New York U.S. attorney, who was investigating the president's inaugural committee, the president's lawyer, the president's campaign. Almost all aspects of the president's political and financial being were being investigated by that office. And that prosecutor was fired. We've lost the independence of the Department of Justice. This president's taking a wrecking ball to the rule of law, but also the honor code. What's the honor code? Well, the honor code, that's the norm, custom, tradition that we all follow, men and women of honor. That you would have a peaceful transition of power, that you wouldn't use the White House grounds to have a national nominating convention, that you wouldn't solicit money while on the White House grounds for your campaign. He's taken a wrecking ball to all of that. Many of those were just not in the rule of law. So what do we do next? I think first and foremost, we move the honor code to the rule of law. Because the president has not recognized congressional subpoenas and has allowed his aides to just defy congressional subpoenas, we need a fast track to the courts when a constitutional crisis is looming. But the courts today, they don't move at the speed or the clip of presidential corruption. I'll give you an example. Don McGahn, the president's lawyer, was a key witness in the Mueller report. Bob Mueller found that the president had committed about 10 acts of obstruction of justice by lying and directing others to lie. The key witness, though, was not Bob Mueller. It was Don McGahn, who was interviewed for 24 hours laying out directives from the president. When we asked Don McGahn to come in, the White House said he couldn't testify. Now, Don McGahn could have defied that because it was an unlawful order, but he chose not to. That case is still in court. That case goes back to June 2019. And an often question that we received over impeachment is, why didn't you just wait for the courts to resolve the issues of John Bolton, Don McGahn, Mick Mulvaney, Mike Pompeo? Well, we'd still be waiting in court. So we need our courts to move faster. That's one of the biggest reforms. And each and every one of you, people who rely on the courts, I don't have to tell you how slow the courts move. It's not intentional. It's a resource problem. But when it comes to the highest office of the land and the checks and balances that the Constitution demands, we need our courts to keep pace. Otherwise, a corrupt president will abuse that. A frivolous litigant, even before he became president, will understand that he can just freeze us and wait us out. When it comes to the emoluments clause, we can put in place not just what the Constitution would probably have happen if it was litigated and anyone could have standing. Because right now, it's very hard for anyone to have standing to bring a case against the president for receiving gifts from foreign powers. But we can put in place a criminal law that would have a penalty and, of course, be a deterrent. We believe if the Constitution was fully pressed and someone had standing, that the best that could happen is an injunction against receiving a gift. But if you want someone to be held accountable, you could make a federal law that says receiving an emolument, whether you're the president, vice president, president's spouse, president's children, would be a federal crime. When it comes to using the White House grounds, that's called a violation of the Hatch Act, which says federal employees cannot be used to help political campaigns. We have to make it absolutely clear that that also includes the President of the United States and the White House. When it comes to a transition of power, and we have to update what we need to reform almost every single week because the president challenges us. When it comes to a transition of power, we need to look at whether we need to have an independent board that would determine that it is likely there's a president-elect. Because right now, it's the president's own appointee, Emily Murphy at the GSA, who makes the call. And you've read the same stories I've read, that she's perplexed and in a dilemma about what to do because she knows if she hands over the keys to the Biden team, she's going to be fired. Well, I would like to think that the reward of doing the right thing would give you more honor than just keeping your job and doing the wrong thing. But the lesson has to be that if people are going to show such loyalty to somebody who's lost and will hold up a transition that relates to national security, our health security, and just the functioning of government, perhaps an independent body looking at secretaries of states and what they've certified and looking at what independent press outlets have called would make the decision. There's so much that we have to do. And the big question that many of you have asked, what do you do with holding individuals accountable all the way up to the president for their crimes? Well, I shouldn't do anything about that. No politician should be anywhere near determining how you hold a corrupt president and their enablers accountable. But we can't sweep it under the rug. I've proposed a presidential crimes commission The idea that you would have Republicans and Democrats not connected to the Biden administration, not connected to the former Trump administration, people who are independent of politics today, perhaps elders and statespersons and people who have served in the past, would appoint independent prosecutors to look at what the president and his team have done. If we're going to go down this road of holding enablers accountable, it has to be independent, and the public also has to perceive it as such. I am afraid, though, that if we do nothing, that we will find not only in the future a corrupt president will come along, but a competent president will come along. We should be scared every day that remains in this presidency by the president's corruption. We are spared, though, by his incompetence. The darkest days are when he weaponizes competent individuals like Bill Barr and Mike Pompeo at the Departments of Justice and State. That's when I get most worried, because they know what they're doing. They know how to use government, and they know how to enable the president. But if we do nothing, if we don't put in place more checks and balances, I am afraid that we will slide toward authoritarianism. And I don't think it could be only Republicans that could do it. I think the thirst for power and the temptation to ignore Congress and some individuals could be too great if we do too little. I hope Republicans in this new Congress and this new administration, knowing that Donald Trump is no longer around, don't see these measures as punitive toward Donald Trump, but as measures that are good for our democracy. What do we do about the lawyers? Well, I don't have to remind you that under the American Bar Association, there is Rule 4.1, truthfulness in statements to others. It says that transactions with persons other than clients, in the course of representing a client, a lawyer shall not knowingly make a false statement of material fact or law to a third person, or fail to disclose a material fact to a third person when disclosure is necessary to avoid assisting a criminal or fraudulent act by a client. We've seen a lot of false statements in the last few weeks by people representing the president. Not just to courts, but in public forums. It's corrosive to our democracy. It's not for me to decide what should happen to those lawyers. It's state and national bar associations that should. But if we do nothing, the rules will no longer matter. Slowly we'll be a country where leaders think that there's one set of rules that everyone else has to follow, and a set of rules that let them off the hook and give them immunity. I feel strongly about this. I didn't go to Congress to work on a case against the president. I look forward to going back to being a member of Congress where 2/3 of my legislation was bipartisan. But when Donald Trump was elected, I remembered the earliest lesson I learned from my father. He was a police chief in a small town. And one day I remember, I was about 5 years old, my mom and my dad having quite an emotional conversation. My father was crying. My mom kept using the word fired. I didn't understand what it meant. As a 5-year-old, I remember this conversation because I literally thought my dad was going to be put in the fire. I later learned that my father had moved from California, where he was a deputy sheriff for the Alameda County Sheriff's Office, and then a police officer in Concord, to Iowa to be a police chief in a small town. But he brought big ideas. He created a 911 system. He investigated property crimes that were being ignored before. And in a town that had 3 DUIs the year before he came there, in his first year there, they had 40. Not because they suddenly developed a drinking problem. He just started enforcing the law because he believed they all had to follow the same laws. He told the mayor he couldn't drive around with a gun in his car anymore because no other citizen in the state was allowed to do that. And it all came to a head at the Kossuth County Fair, as many stories do in Iowa. They come back to the county or state fair. My dad got a call from the fire chief that a couple of the mayor's friends were parked in the fire lane and said they could park there because they knew the mayor. My dad told the chief, if they don't move, you have to ticket and tow them. They didn't move. They were ticketed and towed. And the next day, my dad was called by the mayor to come to the next city council meeting. He was called to the carpet in front of the council by the mayor and told that unless he got rid of those tickets, he would lose his job. My dad did not bend. He did not flinch. And a couple weeks later, he lost his job. We packed up our little family and moved out west. It was the earliest and best lesson I could have learned from my father. Nobody is above the law. And he did something that I have not seen many of my Republican colleagues do in Congress. He did something that the GSA administrator is not willing to do right now in this transition. But he did something that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman did. He was willing to speak up and do the right thing, believing it mattered, even if it meant losing his job. Because he believed what Lieutenant Colonel Vindman believed, that in Algona, Iowa, or testifying in Congress in the United States of America, that right matters. I wish you well as you continue to be advocates in the court. Believe in our system, be kind to one another, and fight for the ideals that our country was founded upon, that we all have to follow the same laws. We can have battles every day over policies. We can stick to our principles. But if we abandon the rule of law, throw it out for a cult personality, or because we may benefit in our own profession, we've lost everything. And we're just too good of a country to do that. So I thank you all again for having me as your speaker. And Teresa, I'll toss it back to you. And I think we've got some questions in the chat, and I'd love to hear from your members.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congressman Swalwell. You've really given us a lot to think about, especially our role in holding our government accountable. So thank you. And I definitely echo the wanting to make our courts move faster. That is very, very important to many of our members and their clients, our community. So yes, I've got several questions. So the first one is, what are the practical steps you as a Democrat can take to rebuild collaborative norms in the House and get meaningful legislation passed?
So Teresa, I think the first thing we can do again is to try and unite around the virus. See this as the greatest challenge we've faced since World War II, and to put not only for us to unite, but for Americans ourselves. Whether it's using the Defense Production Act, which I think Republicans also acknowledge we need to do to manufacture the virus, and it may not be the factories that were making the bombs and the bullets and the boots for our troops as they were in the early 40s, but putting American businesses to work to manufacture the materials needed to distribute the vaccine, and all of us stepping up and taking volunteer shifts to help distribute it and get America inoculated. That could bring us all together, and I see that as the greatest opportunity in Congress is to see this as a reset. I think we failed the early test of COVID, but we have an opportunity now on the vaccine for every American to get it.
Great. I would love that. How do we tamp down on misinformation and conspiracy theories? worried about the rise of some of these new networks, even possibly the Trump network. And did the progressive movement, the Green New Deal, the Black Lives Matter movement hurt the Democrats' chances of flipping the Senate and cause them to lose seats in the House?
Yeah, as to the first question, certainly we have to protect speech, and that's where we're challenged. And I think everyone here, most lawyers here, smarter than I am, and judges here know better than I do. But there's a fine line between having a right to say what you want, on a social media platform or on a broadcast, a television broadcast, but providing or espousing speech that incites violence is certainly not allowed. And then also platforms that are not the public square. And right now, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, they're not the public square. So putting speech on there that could be detrimental to COVID precautions we have to take, or detrimental to our elections and our democracy. Well, those platforms have a right to, they're not banning the speech. They're putting a banner there saying that this information, either there's another side to this, or as it relates to COVID, here's what you need to know. We should look at whether these platforms are more like utilities and how they are regulated, because they do feel a lot like the public square. But I think that's a big challenge right now. In Section 230, which is the code that regulates electronic communications, that's going to be up for reform in this new Congress. As to Black Lives Matter and other organizations, over 2/3 of Americans, when polled at the peak of the summer, expressed support for Black Lives Matter. I think if it was not clear to the American people that Black Lives Matter and we need police, then that's something we have to wrestle with and figure out how do we communicate that, because I don't think there's many members in my Democratic caucus who believe that we should get rid of the police. And as a brother to 2 police officers and the son of a cop and a former prosecutor, I want the police to pull a drunk driver off the road. I want them to show up to a domestic dispute. I want them to investigate a property crime. We need them to do that. But I think we also need them to understand the racial sensitivities in the Black community and the raw data that shows that they're more likely to be victims of unjustified police violence. And so I hope that the first thing we can do on that issue is to pass the Justice in Policing Act, which we passed in Congress with bipartisan votes, but have not been able to get a vote in the Senate.
Let's hope that will happen. Yeah. You speak about the importance of education in ensuring that students and teachers have adequate resources. When will more be done for educators? Adequate funding has always been lacking and is needed now more than ever.
Certainly to make schools safe, right? There's the urgent, which is to have a safe working environment for teachers and a learning environment for our students. And in the HEROES Act that we passed back in May, also has not received a vote in the Senate. There was over $200 million, in that for helping. $200 billion in that, 200 billion for helping our schools so that they could make the infrastructure improvements. I happen to believe that we can be the strongest, most powerful country in the world without spending what the next 7 countries spend combined on their militaries. And when you do that, when you reduce military spending and rely more on alliances, you have more money to take care of schools, to take care of access to healthcare and job training. And so when it comes to budgeting, that's kind of how I view this, and that would allow us to have more money. And of course, driven by what the local needs are and recognizing the role of local school boards to decide that. But I think the federal government should be providing more money. And the way we should do that is to reduce what we spend on national defense and increase the allies we have in the world.
All right, great. Next one, I agree with everything you're telling us about Trump, but nothing stopped him from doing it. How do I look my kids in the eye and tell them that checks and balances really do work and is not just a theory? How do I teach them that corruption is the most heinous act that an official can commit? And yet this president and his family and friends have benefited and continue to benefit from corruption.
Well, when we impeached him, he was not removed, but he did ultimately give Ukraine the money. And that, to me, while that's, a consolation prize, so to speak, the lesson I learned there was we started our impeachment inquiry on September 11. And up to that point, Ukraine had not received the aid for over a year. Once we started the investigation, they actually did receive the aid, and nothing changed as far as the reasons that were stated as to why they were holding up the aid. Ukraine didn't do anything different from the point we started the investigation to the point that they ultimately got the aid. The only thing that changed in the whole ether of things is that we launched an impeachment investigation. So I learned in that exercise that if you check him, he actually typically will back down. Now, impeachment is an extraordinary remedy, and the other ways to check him, like congressional subpoenas, as I said, they take too long to enforce, and he has certainly benefited from that. But I would say to the person who has to look their kids in the eye, good did win because this president was not reelected. And this, if he was reelected, I think you would have a much harder time looking your kids in the eye and explaining why a corrupt president was reelected. But he lost. And I think, democracy has been, and its ideals have been reaffirmed.
Okay. Let's see, what can be done in Congress to rein in members who outright lie in public using their elected position? Shouldn't there be stronger ethics enforcement in Congress to restore honor and faith in our national leaders?
Yes. And ultimately, I think good government reforms will bring us more honest, more responsive members of Congress. California passed a couple of these in 2010. We have top two primaries, so any voter, any party can vote for any candidate. So no longer is it a primary system where you have low voter turnout and the result is almost cooked and already determined. And then independent redistricting uses, God forbid, geography and math to determine congressional lines rather than protecting one party and the leaders in that party and the incumbents in that party. So that system in California has worked. We have legislation called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would have that system nationally as it relates to independent redistricting. And then I ultimately think getting the dirty outside money out of our politics has to happen. I would like to see us go to a publicly financed system where each person can give up to a small amount of money, but it's matched, and that would really water down and depress the influence that many organizations and businesses have, where they can spend unlimited money without having to disclose to Americans what they're spending. All
right, that sounds good. Do you agree with Biden that the DOJ should not investigate Trump's many crimes?
I read, I saw the headline, but when you read that story, Biden said that, it should be an independent, it should be independent. He essentially said what I said, which is, whatever happens should be done independently. And he doesn't want to be making the call. And I think what you're going to see is nerds are going to come back into government. People who are qualified and experienced are going to come back into government, and government's probably going to be a lot more boring. And I'm sorry if you turned on press conferences to get your entertainment, but I think it's going to get a little more boring, and I think that's a good thing.
Hey, I'm happy to get competent people in. That's always a good thing. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, great. Will there be an extension of the coronavirus forbearance plan for students? As the parent of 2 recent college grads, that's a question from me too. As of December 31st, the forbearance will be over, and this has been a huge relief for those with student loans.
So in the HEROES Act, yes, we had extended it. The CARES Act that was passed and signed into law extended it until October 1. The president, by executive order, which I think he is allowed to do on student loans, because it's paid to the Treasury, he extended it until the end of the year. And I welcome that. That was the right thing to do. So I do hope that as we take on funding the government, which the funding expires December 14, as we're negotiating that right now, I hope that's a part of it. I can just tell you, I'm one of the 40 million student borrowers in America with nearly $100,000 in student loan debt. So I understand the issue, and I know what it means to young families, especially if you're out of work right now. So I will keep fighting for forbearance until the economy is back on its feet.
All right, fantastic. Let's see, what can be done during the next 3 years to hold Trump and his family accountable for their crimes so that Trump or one of his sons don't successfully run for president in 4 years?
Yeah, again, I think just independence in prosecutions. And the president, he faces real challenges, not even federally, but from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who went all the way to the Supreme Court to get the president's taxes. And it looks like they're going to prevail on that. And the president cannot pardon himself from a local criminal prosecution. I don't know much about the case. No one in the public does, but I think we all would agree as lawyers that you don't take a case to the Supreme Court if you're working off of a tip written on the back of a bar napkin. That you do that if you have the goods, and so I do expect that that office would likely seek to indict the president after he leaves office. I don't know when they would do it, and they should only do it if they can prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. But just my experience as a prosecutor is that they only would go that far if they have a pretty solid case. So, he's going to, whether he pardons himself or has Mike Pence pardon him before he leaves office, that doesn't save him on local and state prosecutions.
Okay.